So we manage the contract with Marburg. So Marburg is our actual hauler. They're the ones going out. They're picking up the materials from the residents, from businesses. We contract them for a range of services, and that does include illegal dumping services. So you could call us, we would forward you to Marburg, but generally you can call Marburg for any sort of account changes or illegal dumping, and they put it in their system and they schedule to go pick it up. Also countywide, all apartments or all single family homes and businesses, any account holder can schedule to very large item pickups. So if you have many items, you're doing some spring cleaning, you can always call those, and we encourage that so that people don't illegally dump. And that does happen a lot with students too, when you're all of a sudden leaving an apartment and you need to get out and then all of a sudden you toss it. We see that a lot happen with near CC and especially near UCSB. And the UCSB is kind of county jurisdiction, so I'm just in the city, so it's just downtown. But
so 2 a year, do we pay for those? Or
2 a year, they're free, and they're pretty much unlimited items. So it's not just one couch, it could be a ton of things. But you just need to let Marburg know. So waste management, what does it mean? So waste management really is a larger thinking about all the different items that you encounter in your everyday lives and what you do with them. So you use them once, you throw it out maybe, you use it once, you throw it in the recycling, or maybe you use it for a year or two. Maybe it's a couch and you use it for 10 years and then you throw it out. It's really thinking about all the things that we interact with in our daily lives, what we're purchasing, and then where that's going once we're done with it. So that might change based on you as a person, you as an employee, the things you use in your office or your business uses, managers of business, what they're purchasing and where their materials are going. But really, whose job is it to manage these things? It's all of us. We all need to be really considerate and thoughtful about the amount of waste that we're generating. And the reason that is because really waste is material. It was purchased. So if you're saving that material from being used up and thrown away, you're saving money, you're saving the energy and the resources that were used to create that material. And those things directly affect the environment and the world we live in. So first off, where does our trash go? Well, our trash is picked up and it is not sorted whatsoever. Trash goes in the bin, it's picked up, and it's combined and hauled all the way to the Tahigas landfill, which is just up the coast. From here, it'd probably be 25 minutes or so. And you can't really see it. Oh, you're not in this picture. But here it is. Up. You can't really see it from the freeway. It's just off the freeway, but you can't see it unless you knew it was there. And what is a landfill? Well, it's essentially just a pile of layered trash and dirt.
Do you think there's ever a conversation about making the landfill visible? Or was it all about making the landfill invisible?
Invisible. Yeah, so they really do. The landfill was built in a canyon, so there was a lot of space and it was tucked away kind of between two mountainsides. And the reason for that was it was out of the way, it was out of downtown, it was out of where urban areas were being built up. And it was a centrally located space for most of the county. I don't know what year exactly the landfill had started, but there's different areas, so they're called cells, and they only work in a certain cell. So they'll actually, right there, you can see that kind of working cell. They'll go, that whitish coloring is trash. So the trucks pull up, they dump the trash, they compact it with some large trucks, and then they pour dirt over it. And then they'll do the same thing. And then when they're done to a certain height, they'll close up that cell and they'll move to a different cell. So it's all mapped out. So they could go back a few years and say, hey, where is this trash specifically? And they'd be able to know where on the mountain that they've created where that trash is if they needed to go search for something, who knows. But something to really think about is that most of the trash you've thrown away in your lifetime is still around. So all of those disgusting, dirty plastic diapers and cloth diapers that you might have used when you were a kid are still probably in a landfill somewhere. If you're here, they're probably still in this landfill, and they're going to be there pretty much until you're gone. So thinking about everything that we put in the trash is really having a much longer life than even us. It should be really impactful for how we're choosing to purchase our materials and what we're choosing to do with those. So our daily choices do matter, as it says. So trash is not sorted, it goes right to the landfill. That will change in about 2 years. I'll talk about that a little later. There will be a new facility that will sort the trash, mainly to pull out some of the materials that could have been recycled and ended up there by mistake. or any of the organic materials. That could be paper, food waste, anything that is kind of biological that could be broken down and composted. They're going to pull that out as well. But I'll talk about that in a little bit. So our trash right now, it's estimated at the bin of trash, 30% actually should be going to the landfill, 35% should have been put in the recycling bin, and 35% is organics. And that could be food waste, that's wasted food that you never ate, or just scraps of food. That could also be wet, dirty paper that probably should have gone in the recycling. So there's a lot of material, about 70% of the trash could have gone somewhere else.
Is the 35% that's recyclable with the new numbers of only accepting 1s and 2s rather than the full number spectrum? Is that 35?
It would still be about 35, and you'll see why later. Because those percentages are not by volume of material, it's really by weight. It's by how much massive weight, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, so you'll get that. So some of the 4 bins that most places have, at least in the city of Santa Barbara, there is food scraps, a yellow bin available to businesses and schools in the county as well, and the county of Santa Barbara runs that program. But pretty much the 3 are the bins that we really do know and use the most. And what is recyclable? Just general recycling. I'll dive into this more later, but we're saying some plastic now, pretty much all metals, all dry paper and cardboard and mixed paper, and then all glass. But a good point is it needs to be clean and dry. Recyclables need to be clean and dry.
How often would you trust when a product says that it's recyclable?
Never.
Okay.
Yeah. To know if something is recyclable or not, you really need to know what is recyclable in your local area. So that would be coming to the city or coming to the county, go to one of our websites and looking at those, looking at any of the materials that we put out there. Most things that have a recycling symbol, it just means, hey, this is this type of material, this type of plastic, and it could be recycled. Does not mean it can be recycled. It really has to do with what facilities are nearby and whether or not someone is willing to actually take that material and turn it into something else. Pretty much anything is recyclable. Anything could be turned into something else, but it does require facilities, it requires money, it requires a chain for that material to get turned into something else.
Is there any regulation of saying that things are recyclable? Or you
No.
just stand on your product
No,
and
yeah,
go
it's
your
a
merry
world's
way?
best cup of coffee kind of situation. I mean, you can say a lot of stuff. There are some communication rules, on TV and stuff, you can't have false advertising, but for the recycling symbol, it just says kind of what type of material it is. It doesn't require that if they say it's recyclable, that it could potentially, yeah. So just to kind of go through what happens with recycling. So we know trash goes to landfill, recycling gets picked up. It gets combined, so the counties and the city of Santa Barbara gets combined together, and then it gets hauled off down to Ventura County. So there are some resource uses in bringing it down there. It goes on a conveyor belt, and through different sort of processing, I'll go one forwards and back again. There's human sorting, so there could be actual hands pulling out materials. And then depending on the type of material, there's also some machine sorting. So for the most part, metals and paper and glass are sorted out by machines, and then a lot of what's left over, so we call that residual stuff that could go to the trash, is the plastics and then leftover trash. So for here down in Ventura, the plastics are pulled out towards the end, and that's by visual, that's by actual people looking at the materials and saying, we are going to grab these things and sort them by color, by type, as the materials are coming through. So as you can see, the more trash you're putting into the recycling bin, or the more things that you think might be recyclable and you put in there that are trash, are just gonna get in the way of all the good stuff. If they only have 2 seconds to decide what materials they're gonna be grabbing in front of them, they're gonna go for big, clean things that they know about, and like a big Tide bottle that's really recyclable. But if that Tide bottle is in or covered by other trash, they might not see it, they might not get it. So we do have to think about not making sure we know exactly what we're putting where. And that kind of goes into this new thing that we're really calling wish cycling or aspirational recycling. Recycling makes us feel good because we use this one plastic one time for maybe 5 minutes, maybe 20 minutes, and we say, well, I should have brought my reusable cup. I didn't have this, but it's okay because it's probably recyclable, right? And you throw it in the recycling bin. All of this stuff is not recyclable. This is all trash. Everything on here needs to go in the trash. Even people are like, well, what about paper towels? Well, paper towels are already a very like low quality material. They're usually wet. They're usually contaminated with food. They're not recyclable. Plastic utensils, they're not. So we need to just be better stewards and thinking about what we're using these bins. We need to be trained on these bins. If I don't know something is recyclable or not, just Google it. The city of Santa Barbara and the county have great websites and resources online to help you figure that out. And the reason this is so important is because we're dealing with a lot of situations like this in foreign countries, especially in Asia, Indonesia, China, India in certain parts, where there is a lot of junk plastic. And I bring this up because, yes, a lot of plastic and a lot of waste and trash is being generated in these countries, but you'll see that these countries are also receiving a lot of trash and plastic from us and from other developed nations because we sent it to them to be recycled when it wasn't really that recyclable material. So I want to take just a few minutes just to talk about plastics, because plastics are really the big issue nowadays, and it's really only going to get worse. And I talk about kind of the global impacts. Well, this is the global primary plastics production by use. So this is million metric tons globally. You can see it kind of started in the late 40s when plastic was invented, and now it's grown rapidly until 2015. And this is research coming out of UCSB. And to kind of give you an idea, they factored about, of all the plastic that has ever been created on the entire earth in all of time, about half of it was created in the last like 15 or 16 years. So that's how much rate of producing plastic has grown. From 1940 until now, and half of the mass of plastic that has ever been produced was just in that last 15 to 16 years. So we really are creating more and more and more because it's a great material. It's super functional. It's great for medical uses because you can sterilize it, you can prepackage everything and keep it clean and sanitary. But you can see the different sectors: packaging, transportation. Packaging is the biggest one. It's a really highly functional material, but now we're dealing with the ramifications of how much plastic there is. So this is another one by not just generation, by waste generation. So where is the wasted plastic coming from? Again, it's mostly packaging, transportation, building construction, but yeah, mostly packaging.
What are consumer and institutional products?
Consumer and institutional products.
They're like tealish.
I'm actually not too sure. This is some research that I pulled from UCSB's website, but I don't know what that would be.
Those plastic forks you get at the restaurant, that's consumer.
Yeah, consumer and institutional products. I'm not too sure. I'd have to look into that.
It just seems to have grown a lot recently.
Yeah. And so this, just to compare plastic generation over time, this is from 1960 until now, and the growth of recycling over time. Of the plastic production, how much of that plastic has actually been recycled over time? And we've been really pushing, at least here in the States, we've been pushing recycling for a few decades now. But recycling takes behavioral changes. It takes, on the part of the consumer, on the part of the businesses, it takes money to do it. It takes facilities. So we clearly have not caught up with how much plastic we're actually getting produced, because the recycling rate has only been about 9%. I think it's 9% now. And so we're really dealing with a situation where we have a ton of plastic, and we just don't have that much recycling, even though we've been focused on it for a while. And to kind of talk about all of the waste generated, about 10% or 9 to 10% was recycled, but of all the plastic that was ever produced, they're estimating of all the waste, 14% is incinerated, 10% was recycled and then turned into something else. And there's still a lot of plastic that is there. So there's estimated 76% of accumulated in landfills or the natural environment. They don't know the exact spot, but between all the plastic that was generated and then brought back into the system, the other plastic has to go somewhere else. So it's still in use, or in the natural environment or it's in landfills. So
why not incinerate more? What's that incineration?
yeah, I mean, that's a lot of places, instead of recycling it or landfilling it, you can incinerate it and get some more energy out of it. You're also dealing with a lot of the pollutants that it produces, and a lot of the greenhouse gas emissions that it produces incinerating it as well.
I've heard people in Europe incinerate more, or is there local counties that may incinerate?
So California does not. Because of our air pollution standards, we don't have, I think we might have a few incinerators that are still running, but there's still a lot of incineration happening on the East Coast. I don't know about Europe though. Yeah. And we also have to think about not only plastic being out in the environment, but there's a whole new class of research happening right now on microplastics, and that's little tiny fibers of man-made plastic materials. And where are they? They're pretty much everywhere. They've been found on Mount Everest, in the air, in pristine locations, far from any humans, because the little bits that break off from plastics can be carried by the air, carried by the water. And they don't break down. They'll get smaller and smaller and smaller, but they don't actually become bioavailable. They don't break down into a natural component. And the thing is, they've been found in human poop for the first time. So we are actually eating microplastics. We're drinking microplastics every time we have a water bottle. I'm probably getting some in this. And we don't really know what the effects are on the human body or on the materials or on the food that we're eating. We're finding it in fish, and then it's getting put into the actual muscles of fish, and we are eating those plastics, but it's not looking good for the animals that they're researching so far. But this is some new research that's coming out. So I'm not going to dive too far into that, but I wanted to give you an overview of plastics globally so that we can then talk about recycling and plastics here in California specifically, and that directly has to do with China. So China was accepting about 50% of the world's recyclables. 50% of the world's recyclables were getting shipped over there. 25% of everything that we were shipping to China was just recyclables. And the reason for that was we're getting a lot of goods, cargo ships are coming over, and then they were going back empty. So why not fill those with materials that maybe some Chinese companies would want to use, and it would be really shipped to send back because the cargo ships are already going to be going back empty. In time, we started accepting more and more recyclables. Some of the lower quality stuff could be plastic clamshell containers and plastics like produce plastic containers, the green ones, and any sort of these non-thick, very light and flexible, clear plastic containers. Even sometimes with some plastic bottles were probably included in that. More dirty plastics, because there was potentially a worth to those. And a lot of the markets said, hey, yes, we'll buy them, we'll take them. So we said, oh, that's great. We put it in the recycling, we packaged it in the facilities, and then someone bought it because they're going to recycle it. And we say, oh, we're done. It got recycled, right? That's all we know. We're not following the chain of custody all the way to where it's actually getting processed. Well, to do that, to process a lot of these plastics, some were just not getting processed at all. Some were getting piled, dumped in rivers, and were ending up in the ocean and probably back on our beaches. But a lot of them that were getting processed were not really in an environmentally friendly way. So we have really good standards here in California in terms of what you can pollute, what you can emit into the water and into the air, but they don't have those kinds of environmental standards over there. So what was happening was that we were externalizing the cost of trying to recycle those materials by pushing it over to China. China was recycling a lot of that and contaminating their water and air, and they finally said no more. So in 2018, they said, we don't want any more of your junk plastic to the world. So this is billions, so 16 billion pounds of recovered plastic in, 2016? And then as you can see, 2018, it just dropped off entirely. So what happens with all that plastic? We still have it. We're still generating it, we're still making more plastic, we're still using more plastic, and we're still trying to get rid of it. And then all of a sudden, the biggest importer of plastics and recycling just says, no, we don't want it anymore. So we've had to have a full shift in terms of what we can recycle and trying to recycle as much material as possible. And we've also had to have a shift to, hey, you know what? Recycling has never been the best option. If you've heard of the 3 R's, reduce, reuse, recycle, recycle is last. It's actually a hierarchy. Reduce first, reuse second, recycle third. And we've been pushing recycling for so long, and because it's usually the easier option and there's a lot more materials that happen out there, that we kind of forgot to focus on waste reduction first. So what we're trying to do right now is we did change some of the guidelines, or these are some tips on how to recycle, how to really think about your recycling right. So all the items that you ever put in a blue bin should be empty and clean, dry, and loose. For us to process those and sort them out, nothing should be bagged up at all. You should just be throwing the materials in there. If you're worried about getting the bin, so if you're recycling correctly, your bin will always be clean with no need for a liner or bag. So a lot of people say, well, I don't want to get my bin dirty. Well, if you're worried about getting your recycling bin dirty, you're probably putting in contaminated recycling. So that means for bottles, you just want to tap any liquids out, put the caps back on, throw them in the blue bin.
Can I start on that, Brad?
Yeah, sure.
Inevitably, the bottles have 2 different types of plastic. The top is one.
Yeah.
Is that another problem?
The recycler will deal with that. The issue right now is that the smaller the piece of plastic, it's the more likely it's not going to get recycled. So we're really only recycling things that are 6 inches and above. So a plastic cap by itself in the blue bin is not going to get recycled.
But if I leave it on top, even that's 2 different types.
If you leave it on top, they'll be able to process that out. It will be some sort of, they sometimes have machines depending on the facility, but it's also a small amount of different plastic that they're now going to treat as contamination, and they know that's going to happen. And so that's something to be mindful of. But the biggest issue with putting in food or water in the blue bin is that when that food or water gets on paper, the paper gets contaminated, it molds, it starts to break down. By the time it gets anywhere to get recycled, once it molds, it's not recyclable anymore. And so...
Is it okay that I took a picture of this?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, sure, yeah.
Just want to be polite.
As far as paper, I heard that it can be helpful to like put the paper in a paper bag so that you get more volume. Just because paper is like a single piece of paper, no one's really going to grab.
Yeah. So it could be true. It really just depends on how big the paper is. The bigger the piece of paper, the more substantial the material, the more likely it's going to get recycled. Smaller and smaller pieces are going to end up just becoming trash. They'll either get contaminated in the process. Like shredded paper is not great. It's probably not recyclable. So we when people ask about paper shredding, we say, if it's really private information, shred it. But if you don't have to be shredding paper, just put everything in. You can put all your mail, envelopes, all that stuff in the blue bin. That's fine.
It's taken by like large volumes because in terms of like a company that goes through a lot of paper.
Yeah, those are fine. A big pickup like a shredding event or drop off all your shredded, that's fine.
Okay.
Mostly because you're collecting all just paper.
Yeah.
The issue with making recycling easy, which we've done year over year, and just saying, we're going to have one bin for recycling for metal, glass, plastic, and paper, is that now it's all together. Instead of requiring everyone to separate into different bins and to be more diligent with that, by putting them all together, now you're getting mixed materials in there, and that's where the contamination happens. That's where it becomes harder to pull out specific things. If it's all just paper, that's easy because they know they can guarantee it. So that's fine.
What about the film plastic in envelopes?
That's actually fine. It's such a small amount. And I believe most of them are made of like a cellulose material already. So it is clear, but it's not like a straight up kind of film plastic like saran wrap or something. Yeah.
Oh, no, sorry, I was just...
Oh, no, you're good.
So like the bubble wrap and everything,
Yeah.
even though like it feels terrible to throw them, just throw them in the trash.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'll kind of go through some of the what isn't recyclable rather than the what is. And I'll show you in the next slide what is. But yeah, film plastic. So anything, and we call a film plastic, is essentially a plastic that's been rolled out, kind of like saran wrap, and turned into other things. So wrappers, like a chip bag, is really just that. It's 2 pieces of a film plastic that have been sealed into a square. And yeah, it has some metal, like kind of a liner on the inside, but a film plastic is anything that was rolled out and then turned into something else. So chip bags, wrappers, anything of those crunchy kind of plastics that you can ball up in your hand, that's not recyclable. Any wet stuff, no styrofoam. Styrofoam is a pretty bad material in general. Compostable plastics is an interesting one. You'll see a lot of, so I'll preface with, if it looks and feels like a plastic material and it says it's compostable, it's still plastic. There's a lot of greener plastics out there that are, instead of made from petroleum and oil, they're made from plants. So it could be cornstarch, it could be sugar cane, it could be potato, and they turn that material into a plastic. A plastic is just some polymer-based material. And they turn it into a plastic, which means that there could be less resources used in actually making that material, but once it's created into that material, it is very functional, and it can be composted back into its natural materials. But the issue is that you need really high processing, and you need high heat, and you need a specific facility to do that. So it's kind of back into this, well, they put a recycling symbol on something, so it could be recycled, but you need the right sorting, you need the right bin to put it in, and you need the right machinery to do that. And the same with these bioplastics. Yeah, they could be compostable if you have a facility that can compost them. And unfortunately, we do have some composters here that could take them and compost them, but for the most part, they're also really tricky because they look exactly like a plastic, because they are a plastic. So it's really hard when you get these materials in a big, huge dumpster. Are they going to go through and look at each one and say, oh, really, is it a compostable plastic? No. So they're mostly getting pulled out. And when they get into the environment, they require about 140 degrees heat to break down. So yeah, it's compostable plastic. Oh, if it gets out in the environment, it'll be okay. It will over time. It'll break down, over 100 plus years into its actual natural components, whereas a regular plastic wouldn't. But it's still going to sit out there in the environment as trash for that long. So we're saying really compostable plastics are not that great.
So we shouldn't use bioplastic?
I wouldn't, because it can't, most of the things that you're using bioplastic for are gonna have food and water in them. And so like a regular plastic cup is not recyclable because it's such a little material. It's got contamination. If you're using a bioplastic, it also probably has food and water in it. It's not gonna be recyclable. And even if it was recyclable, you have to sort it out. You have to have the right facilities to be able to process it. And so it's really not that great of an alternative. No green waste, so that's just leaves and all that kind of stuff. Organic waste, no food or anything in the blue bin. Paper towels, generally no. And what we're changing countywide, we're saying no plastic food containers. So if it's a plastic container that had food in it, put it in the trash.
So a big milk carton? Okay.
Yeah, we're not doing cartons either. Yeah.
Well,
milk cartons.
Plastic milk carton?
Plastic, yeah, like a gallon jug would we qualify as a plastic liquid container, and that's fine. Any plastic bottles, plastic milk containers, anything that had a liquid in it that's a plastic is fine, but if it's a plastic container that once had food in it, salsa, sour cream, produce, I should have pizza boxes on here too, because they're over there. Pizza boxes are generally food and oil contaminated, and it's so hard to find markets for some of our materials now that when there's a big thing of cardboard and the people who are looking to buy the materials, if they see a pizza box, even if it's a clean one on the outside of this big cube, they might assume that there's more inside, and probably pizza boxes are going to be contaminated. So they'll assume that there's going to be more contamination in there. So we've wiped out pizza boxes altogether. And it was really before only the top of the pizza box kind of was recyclable because it's just cardboard, as long as it was dry and clean. And then we removed cartons. So a lot of like the chicken broth or almond milk containers for the most part. And anything that's in a kind of shelf stable container, those materials are also called Tetra Pak. It's 3 different materials. Sometimes it's 4 layers, and it's paper, metal, and plastic all fused together. to get that kind of shelf stable, long lasting packaging. The issue with that is when now you're mixing all these materials together, it makes it even harder to recycle. Using more processing, they pulp them, they grind them up, and then there's just a liquid, and then they have to pull out all the metals, and it's just a really, really bad process. Very energy intensive and not great. So we just said no. So if you're buying soup, try and buy it in an aluminum can. Cans, glass, so metals and glass are really what you should, if you're in the supermarket looking for options of what you're purchasing. If you can, try not to buy it in a plastic or a carton container, and try and buy it in plastic or metal and glass, and then just rinse it and you can recycle that. Isolated, but yeah, any to-go containers, pretty much any to-go containers are going to be trash from restaurants or businesses. And then yeah, all the produce containers, so the plastic that holds berries or tomatoes or any of those, we're saying no to it. Right. Just because most of the plastics that had food in them, there are going to be some great people out there that are wash it, totally keep it nice and clean. Right now there's really only markets for number 1 and 2 plastics. Most of those types of containers are not 1 and 2 already. But even if it was, say, a 1 plastic container that they cleaned out entirely, that would be great. But I'm doing communication for the entire community, and we know that most people will not diligently do that, and we're worried about all the rest of our materials. And you'll see in a second
So it's 1 or 2
why.
throw in the wash.
One or two, make sure everything's clean and dry, but generally 1 and 2 plastics are recyclable if you're really going to be diligent. And But the issue is that most of our plastics are the ones with food and water in them. And what happens, like I discussed before, is food and water contaminates the paper. And this is what our blue bin looks like in terms of weight of material. So we've got still about 19% trash. So unfortunately, a lot of stuff put in there. We've got some glass on the left, and then a huge chunk is our cardboard and our mixed paper. So when cardboard and mixed paper gets wet and food on it from plastics, they're contaminated. And what we're trying to do to be the most environmental and keep the most material out of the landfill is recycle the most amount of material. So we're really trying to focus on recycling as much of the cardboard and mixed paper and keep it dry as possible. Whereas we're getting rid of essentially some of those plastics. And we can see down here, there's a few spots. Plastic 2, scrap plastic. The plastics that we're saying no more to are 2% or less of all of our materials. So yeah, we're taking a small hit in terms of how many recyclables or how much material we're actually recycling, but it's so small that we're hoping to actually save a larger chunk of some of the other stuff. And there's another point I was going to make to that. It's just a very small amount of material and a lot of it is really just is kind of junk. A lot of the plastics are super thin, super light, but the issue is that when we change things like this, saying no more food plastics, it feels like we're recycling a lot less, right? Because every single time you're throwing something into a bin, you're making a decision to take this item and where does it go? Well, we encounter a lot of those types of plastics a day, but all those plastics you might have thrown out all week might weigh the same as that glass bottle you threw out. So it's interesting because it's kind of the opposite for how it will feel in the home or actually out there, because there's just so much really lightweight plastic that is usually food and water contaminated and not that great. So what do we do now? So we changed some of the rules to try and get more materials, but we also increase, the efficiency of our facilities. So there's a new facility that the county is building, and there's all the local jurisdictions are partnered with them to build the resource center, which is being built at the Tahigas landfill. And it's really to try and limit what we're landfilling, because we don't have that many more years of dumping in the landfill. There's actually a cap. They can only build the landfill so high before we have to find a new place for trash. But by pulling out all the recyclables and pulling out organics from what goes in the trash, and making sure it gets recycled or turned into something else, we can actually reduce how much material we're just dumping into the landfill. So it prolongs the life of it. So that's one way. It's costly. Our rates went up about just over 16% in terms of how much the cost of trash and recycling and all these services cost. But it's only getting more and more expensive to process materials as we move forwards.
And the costs are going to pass down to the consumer?
Yeah, so to fund the actual construction of this facility, those costs then fall to the charge that we are charged for bringing our materials to the facility, and then we pass that down to, we essentially come up with the rates for trash and recycling based on the charges that we incur for that. Yeah. So besides better processing facilities, more responsibility and accountability, and that's on the businesses to do better recycling themselves, but also to create more recyclable products, or to think about where their products are going. For the most part, businesses will create materials based on their objective, whether they're creating a toy or an electronic, and they push it out there, the consumer uses it, and then the consumer says, well, what am I supposed to do with it now? And the business is totally removed from that, and then the consumer comes to government, usually, who's running trash and recycling locally, and says, well, you don't recycle this. It's like, well, I don't know, some of these things are really complex and many materials in one, and if there's no business out there to buy that material and turn it into something else, there's nothing we can do, unfortunately. So it is really important for businesses to think about the end of life for the products that they're creating, for consumers to know what is and isn't recyclable, and to try and make better purchasing decisions based on that, to use more reusable materials instead of single use. And then for municipalities to be able to find better avenues for some of the materials, to educate better, to have better processing facilities. And really nowadays for our office, it is talking a lot about waste reduction and trying to figure out how we can encourage residents and businesses to think from the very beginning and avoid material waste entirely. So some of the steps that we've taken based on some of the ocean and land pollution, as well as the amount of material, the single-use materials that are out there, we did put through a foam ban. Our city council voted on that for the city of Santa Barbara. And that started January 1st. So, and I say foam ban, that's pretty much styrofoam, all the materials you see on the left. And it's a plastic material, but styrofoam is pretty bad. Once it gets in the water, it leaches chemicals into our water. It breaks apart into 1,000 little pieces. So one styrofoam cup is far worse on a beach than a plastic bottle, because the plastic bottle a week from now is still going to be a plastic bottle if it's on the beach. Styrofoam cup is going to be 1,000 little pieces of styrofoam, and you can't even pick it up. So styrofoam is kind of its own. It's super light. It's airy. It blows in the wind. It floats. So we said no more. Styrofoam is really bad. And this is kind of the sheet that we give out to businesses to say, okay, we banned styrofoam. You can't use styrofoam. This is what we suggest. Reusables, zero waste. You know, a lot of places will have dine-in. They'll have actually tables and chairs for you to sit and eat at the restaurant, but then they're still giving you disposable utensils, disposable plates, all that kind of stuff, because it's the cheapest way. At the same time, they're also paying for the trash that is being generated there. So then we're really trying to switch to compostable fiber-based materials, so things that kind of are more of a paper fiber to-go container. And then sometimes with businesses and restaurants, you know, our regular stuff, aluminum, cans, bottles, glass bottles, that kind of stuff, that's still recyclable. But for the most part, stuff that's coming out of restaurants, all those to-go containers are just not that recyclable. Aluminum foil and aluminum containers are recyclable, but if it has to be entirely clean and dry. So it's usually unlikely if you're getting a burrito and there's cheese mashed throughout the whole thing.
For the compostables, the green bags that you get for produce that say they're compostable, is that actually compostable in my lifetime?
Yes and no.
After I die,
Yeah, those are pretty thin. It is kind of it's a bioplastic, but because it is so thin, I don't know how long that would take to compost in your backyard if you did a backyard composting. There was a study in the UK that they buried bioplastic bags. I think they were not like that. They were like thicker, kind of like a CVS type bag where they are thicker, but they were bioplastic. And they buried them for like 3 years and then pulled them up and then put groceries in them and still carried them around. So these things just don't, depends on the thickness, but it does require high heat processing. For that kind of stuff, that will probably break down a lot faster. but they do have canvas bags, they have mesh bags that you can use for produce too, so we're really trying to encourage residents to switch to those. So we have our foam ban, and then we recently, to kind of really charge ahead in trying to reduce how much plastic pollution there is on our beaches, to try and really reduce the single-use plastic to-go stuff. So forks and stirrers and straws. So plastic straws in Santa Barbara are banned, as well as compostable plastic straws. And then utensils are on demand. So if you want plastic utensils at a place, they have to ask you if you want it. You have to ask them. There has to be a conversation, which is an inconvenience, and that's the point. Because if you inconvenience people, then at least you're having a conversation and you're trying to have them switch to a better, more reusable material. Plastic straws are not the biggest ocean pollutant, but they're one of the easiest things that we can get rid of in our daily lives, to at least move forwards on that. Well, people sometimes say, well, why just plastic straws and not plastic cups? Well, maybe plastic cups will be coming later, but you can drink a drink in a plastic cup without a straw. So it's one step. But the biggest thing is really just ditching single-use items wherever possible. So, yeah, that's kind of.
Is there a agency or a person that kind of enforces this? Because I still see in some restaurants they have straw.
Yeah. So for the most part, our straw ban went into effect July 1st. We've only been doing enforcement right now based on calls saying, oh, this business is still using it. Yes, you can always call our office and just say, hey, we'd recommend you just mention it to the business while you're there. Have that, neighborly discussion. And as a customer for any business, if you see something that they're doing wrong or using styrofoam or something, just say, hey, I'd prefer you do not use styrofoam. We do need to start having this open dialogue as a consumer. And so, yeah, we're ramping that up to kind of, now it's at the 3-month mark. There's some businesses that would be allowed if they applied to kind of go through the stocks. So if they already had a year's worth of straws, they would have to make the case for needing to use those because it would be a financial burden on them. Or there's opportunities for that. And you can still buy plastic straws in the supermarket. You can still buy them in bulk. Businesses cannot get them out for free, essentially. Yeah. So
how about plastic in the ocean regarding like fishing equipment?
Yeah, that's a huge percentage. Fishing nets and fishing line makes up. I don't know I wanted to say 30%, but I think it might be more of the ocean plastic. Yeah. That's not something we've dealt with necessarily at the city, but our waterfront does programs with the fishermen there, and a lot of the other NGOs and nonprofits will work directly with fishermen to try and reduce that. We're doing better in California, but that is a huge source of plastic pollution. Yeah. And just for our office, we're really trying to shift people, even things like our sour cream container. Yes, that's not really going to be recyclable anymore, but there's a lot of uses for it at home. So reuse is still better than recycle. And then we started making these bamboo reusable to-go cutlery kits, just to really encourage people to say, okay, 80 years ago, it was kind of weird if you didn't walk around with your own utensils. We kind of have to go back to this model of, okay, well, what do I need to do the things if I'm going to the coffee shop, I should bring my mug, or I should bring my iced coffee mug, or maybe if I'm going out to a restaurant, I should bring a plate at some point. I know it seems it's gonna take a while, but I think something like this is a good first step to say, like, no, I don't need plastic utensils for 5 minutes and then throwing them away. When for the most part, plastic utensils are really durable and could be used many, many times. But there's also some issues with plastics in general in terms of how much they break down, and now we're seeing how much plastic is getting into our food and into our water, and we don't know the effects of that on us. So also switching to just washables, these really durable materials that you can use, wash, and reuse over and over and over again, and focusing on less waste. How much time do we have? 4:23. So briefly, this is a program that's available for also businesses in the county, but in the city we have most of our restaurants. Some of our businesses are on our food scraps program, which is a yellow bin program. They're allowed to put in pretty much any food, meat, cheese, even some of that contaminated paper product, because that can still, like pizza boxes and paper plates and paper towels, that all can be composted at a facility. Our facility is in Camarillo, but now they're actually shipping it out to Simi Valley, but it should hopefully come back to Camarillo soon. And they pretty much put it out there. They mix it up. This is essentially a compost pile. It gets super, super hot, so they're going to be, as the microbes start to break down the materials, the heat generated will help actually encourage more breakdown of the material. And they start, our compost actually gets turned into like a soil additive. So it's not a soil product directly, but they mix it with other things like other green waste and more kind of hardy materials as an additive for parks, for topsoil, for other farms and agriculture. So yeah, it gets turned into a lot of stuff. And this is food scraps and compost organic materials coming from our community are mostly from restaurants. They're producing a lot of food. They're producing a lot of waste there. And some businesses are doing really good at trying to reduce the amount of waste, but then we also have a lot of food that goes bad in supermarkets and stuff too. So a lot of the organic waste is coming from that industry. So that's why the food scraps program is just for our businesses right now. But moving forwards, all of that food waste and organic matter will be pulled out of the trash for our residents at the new resource center. So to kind of look back to something that Westmont might want to do, and we've worked with a number of businesses in the city of Santa Barbara. We worked with the El Encanto recently, and they said, we're creating a lot of waste. We want to reduce our costs. We want to get more things that are in the trash into the recycling and figure out where they should go, and just generally reduce our waste. So we always recommend doing a waste audit. Our team comes in and essentially says, okay, let's look at your bins. Let's see what is in the wrong place, what could have gone where, what things could you have avoided, talking about like, furry slippers that they give out, which get used 1 or 2 nights and then get tossed away. If they're really looking to reduce waste, they should eliminate the slippers, or at least encourage your residents or your customers to bring them home with them. Then again, they're gonna get probably thrown out at some point because who knows if people are actually gonna use them. So really having an audit will help you put everything in perspective and see where the waste is happening. Could it have been avoided, or should it have gone somewhere else? So use reusables whenever possible. Recycle is the least best option. When you are recycling, make sure it's clean and dry. Sort properly. We always have people say, oh, I don't know what's recyclable. My next question is always, well, when's the last time you looked? And there's a lot of things that come up in my daily life when I'm trying to think of an actor's name in some movie. I immediately go to Google and punch it in. There's a weird disconnect between what is and isn't recyclable, and you're just like, oh, I just don't know because no one's told me. Well, we have a lot of resources online. The county's website is lessismore.org, and there's a ton of resources for where you can bring your stuff. If you can't put it in one of the bins, where you can bring it to get recycled, for instance, electronics. There's many drop-offs in town, but there's a lot of resources online for our community. And keep food and liquid out of the trash, or should just say recycling. Food and liquid generally has to go in the trash, but and when possible, compost. So if you don't have access to a yellow bin at the business or at the school that you work at, you can do backyard composting, which is a little bit of work on your part. You have to get a bin, you have to have space for it, so generally it doesn't work that well for apartments. But yeah, composting at home can really provide, especially in Santa Barbara where it's nice all year round, your compost isn't gonna freeze. You can create some really good soil additive to add to your landscaping, so. And that's it.
Saying clean and dry.
Clean and dry.
Like what about soda bottles? We want them washed?
As
dry?
clean and dry as possible. So soda bottle just means empty it out.
Okay.
And we're suggesting for bottles, shampoo bottles, all that stuff, empty it out, kind of give it a quick rinse if there's still a lot of like shampoo and stuff in there,
Okay.
and then put the cap back on.
And water bottles, put the cap on,
Yep.
there's always gonna be drops of water in
Yeah,
there.
that's fine.
Okay.
That's fine. We say dry, meaning as dry
Okay.
as possible, yeah.
Okay.
We just don't want, 2 or 3 gulps of water or whatever still left in there. Just empty it out.
And for like bottles you clean out, you want the cover back on, the metal cover, or the plastic cover?
It depends, yeah. So if it's a plastic bottle, all plastic bottles, rinse it, and dump it out, put the cap back on. If it's something like a glass jar, like a spaghetti jar, and the top is metal and the glass is glass, put those in separately.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
As long as
'cause
they're
it's-
clean and dry.
Yeah, as long as they're clean and dry. Yeah, because you want to think about it's one bin, but there's many different materials, and you want to keep the types of materials. Metal is separate from plastic, separate from glass. Yeah.
The trash bag goes in like, think about how some of the plastic gets to the ocean.
Yeah.
So if the trash in the trash bag, it stays in the trash bag forever, or is the trash bags often rip open and the trash goes everywhere?
It will rip. In the process of them moving it from one bin to the next and going in, and it gets compacted in the truck, and then it gets put into another truck and gets dumped on the landfill, the trash bags are definitely going to get ripped. But for the most part, I would say a lot of the trash is still within a bag. And that is still just goes into the ground. Essentially, it sits in the landfill. Yeah.
So the plastic that gets in the ocean, it could be like a single thing throwing it on the ground?
Yeah, a lot of the plastic sources from our community would be through creeks and runoff and the wind picking up some bags and stuff, but it's mostly from either trash that didn't make it into a bin or came out of a bin before it was picked up. Sometimes, unfortunately, in the process of actually collecting and sorting the trash, stuff could escape. There are sometimes high winds at the landfill. They do their best to make sure everything is covered overnight, so you're not having wind, you're not having animals. They have, in a lot of landfills, it's a big problem with like seagulls who actually pick at the trash, pick things up, carry the trash somewhere else. But they have a falconer up at the landfill, so there's an actual bird that scares all the, sometimes kills the other bird, kills the seagulls if they get too close. And so they do take a lot of precautions to make sure that none of the materials that are getting in the trash that are going to the landfill are going to escape. But for the most part, it's the little bits of stuff from public containers, and people didn't put it in all the way and it fell and they didn't pick it up. Stuff from our cars that might blow out. There's a lot of trash from
Crows
there.
that pick at garbage.
Yeah, crows that pick at garbage, and animals that pick at garbage.
And there's islands of the plastic and stuff, like in Asia and stuff.
Yeah.
Are there any plans? What are we doing with that?
Yeah, so there's the Great Pacific Garbage Patch that is kind of stuck in this large water formation. It's a garbage patch. It's not an actual island. You can see plastic, but it's not a mound. It's plastic that is now floating and sinking and floating, kind of all spread out in this huge vast of ocean. There's attempts to start cleaning some of that out, but it's going to be really hard. A lot of that stuff is stuck there. A lot of plastic sinks. So we are seeing, there's some also new studies. There was one recently from UC San Diego that was studying plastic fibers in our sediment in the Santa Barbara Channel through time since the 1940s. And there's a lot of plastic that now is building up in the sediment layer in our ocean, which is why some geologists are starting to call this the Anthropocene, because we are now affecting the actual geology of the Earth based on man-made materials. And a lot of that, they were saying a huge percentage of it is from actually car tires. If you think about it, where does the tread go on your tire? It goes onto the road in tiny little fragments, and then the water carries it out to the ocean.
The rain.
Yeah, the rain. So over decades of tires wearing down, and so a lot of the man-made fibers, plastic fibers that they're finding are actually from car tires. But then there's some of the other stuff, broken down plastic bags and all that. I mean, they saw a plastic bag in the Mariana Trench a few months ago. So plastic is really getting everywhere. So there's a lot of ways for plastic to kind of escape the built environment. And we need to start really targeting as much as we can, especially in use of plastic.
It seems like it's easy to feel like the responsibility is on the consumer to sort better. And I even think of sometimes taking a group of friends to go like do the plastic sorting at outlets or something like that. Like,
Yeah.
because I know that people or companies will even do that as like a giving back kind of thing. But it still doesn't seem to, I mean, why should we be doing that? You know, like the companies should be the ones doing that.
Yeah.
It seems. Is there anything that you feel like, you know, individuals or groups of concerned citizens can actually do to take more action, to make more of an impact on companies taking responsibility, on governments taking responsibility?
Yeah, I mean, I think nowadays there's certainly a growing concern for types of materials, and we have seen some companies change what kinds of materials they're producing based on consumer negative reports and consumer activism online and on social media. We saw a lot of people start getting really angry at Trader Joe's for how much plastic they produce. Everything is covered in plastic. I shop there a lot. I like their produce, but everything is covered in plastic. And they have said, you know, by 2030, I think it is, you know, we're going to be, or 2025, I don't even know, they're going to reduce, you know, X percentage of their plastic use in there. So there is a power in, you know, consumers banding together to say no more, we don't want this. But there are other ways of doing it. For instance, you know, we've had alternative to-go materials for a very long time. Styrofoam is the cheapest, so a lot of restaurants were unfortunately still buying styrofoam. To the point where then the city had to put through an ordinance saying, no, you can't give it out anymore. That momentum is starting to happen a little bit more. The UK and the EU is really hammering down on single-use plastics. I think they have just a few more years before it's entirely banned. This to-go plastic utensils, plastic cups, all that kind of stuff. And that affects a lot of the larger brands like McDonald's, these kind of international brands. So we're seeing them start to trial some different ways of giving out materials, and that will trickle back to us. There was a bill that went through, it unfortunately didn't pass, but it could be proposed as a new bill that was going to essentially require, in California, that was going to require businesses to have 75% of what they're producing be recyclable. That also, you have to define what is recyclable. Is it a certain type of material? Does all of California have to have the resource to be able to turn it into something else? Is recycling that thing even worth it? If it takes a ton of energy and water to recycle it, we still have to be mindful of that as well. So that failed, but there is a push to kind of put some of the burden back on the business that's creating all the trash, or not all the trash, creating a lot of it, and making money off the consumers for sometimes choosing less recyclable materials. So yeah, we're moving in that direction. But of course there's a huge lobbying effort from these businesses to not have those kind of ordinances and bills and laws go through. So
Brian, last year we had a presentation from one of your colleagues, and she indicated that domestic compost bins, yellow bins, were coming to the county fairly soon. Is that the case or not?
At the time, that was still potential. We've always had in our office, we wanted to roll out residential composting yellow bins. But now, since this new facility, the Resource Center, is going to be built, that is entirely set up to pull out those organic materials from our trash. The issue with having a fourth bin, especially in a space-constrained city like Santa Barbara, is that by having a fourth bin, you need the actual space on the property to have a yellow bin. You need a new route with new drivers from the trash from Marburg to actually go and pick them up. And you need, if you can process the material correctly out of the trash, it actually would save time and energy in that way. There has been talk of maybe combining, instead of having our green waste, just using that as green waste and compost, because everyone has a green waste bin already. The thing is, our green waste is a really good commodity because it's really clean. They mulch it up, and it actually goes back out to the community. Most of the time in the county for free. You can go and pick up, I don't know how much mulch it is, but for your backyard, which is also really good. It's much better than fertilizer. It really protects the land and keeps nutrients in there. So by putting food in it, you can't have mulch anymore. You would actually have to then compost it. So yeah, there's a lot of back and forth. The plan was to roll that out. We had hopes of doing that, but now with the resource center, I don't foresee that happening.
Thank you. When will the resource center be functional?
2021.
Do you see like field trips from schools to sorting out like?
Yeah, so we, as a city, we don't run any of the facilities ourselves. So Marburg does do tours of their downtown recycling facility and their construction and demolition facility, which does bring in pretty much all construction and demolition. So concrete gets recycled and they collect mattresses there. And so they do tours down there. And then the county will do tours of the transfer station, which is up by the county facilities in Calle Real. That's where a lot of the materials get aggregated and then either sent down to get recycled or up to the landfill. And they also do landfill tours too. So that might be something you want to schedule with them, because it's pretty eye-opening just to get up there. It's also a beautiful spot. You're so high up on the coast. So even if you're on a landfill, yeah. And it's cool just to see the process of them dumping the material, and it changes your perception of when you're throwing something into a trash bin by actually seeing it go out of a trash truck and then onto the ground, and then they just pour dirt on it. Everyone knows a landfill is trash that is just put on the ground, but it's essentially would be like digging a hole in your backyard and throwing the trash you just made into a hole and then burying it.
Yeah, it's not imaginable.
Yeah, it doesn't warp away. Yeah, well, I'm gonna leave Carton. I mean, you've got my number and everything, so if there's any other questions, feel free to reach out to Kenny, and happy to answer them.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you, Brian.
Yeah.